Are you ready for a story? This story is called The Flying Dutchman. It's a legend of an old shipwreck that became a ghost ship. The moon shined down on the wind catcher as the great clipper ship sailed through the cold waters of the southern Pacific Ocean. The year was 1849, and the wind catcher was carrying passengers and cargo from San Francisco to New York City. The wind catcher was one of the fastest ships on the seas. She was now sailing south near Chile in South America. She would soon enter the dangerous waters near Cape Horn. Then she would sail into the Atlantic Ocean and move north to New York City. Suddenly, one of the sailors yelled to the crew. "Look!" he cried. "What is that?" Off in the dark, a frightening glowing shape sailed across the ocean like a ghost. The captain and some of his men moved to the front of the ship to look. As soon as the captain saw the strange sight, he knew what it was. "The Flying Dutchman," he said softly. The captain looked worried and lost in his thoughts. "What is the Flying Dutchman?" asked one of the sailors. Old Sam, the wind catcher's oldest sailor, turned to the crew and spoke. He was the only sailor in the crew who knew the story of the Flying Dutchman. "The Flying Dutchman was a great ship that sailed the sea over 200 years ago," he said quietly. "But she sank in a terrible storm near Africa. Now her ghost sails the seas of the world to warn ships about terrible storms and other dangers ahead." Then, as the ghost ship moved in front of the wind catcher, old Sam told the crew the story. Back in the 1600s, the Flying Dutchman was one of the most powerful sailing ships in Europe. Her captain was Hendrik van der Decken, who was known as one of the world's most skilled sailors. The Flying Dutchman carried valuable cargo to Europe from faraway lands. The ship often sailed down the coast of Africa and around the Cape of Good Hope on its way to India and China. There she picked up spices and tea and brought them back to the markets in Europe. But one day, in 1641, pirates, led by Jean Leclerc, captured the Flying Dutchman and took over the ship. Leclerc forced Captain van der Decken and his crew into lifeboats and left them at sea with no food or water. Captain van der Decken and his men almost died, but they finally reached an African fishing village where they were saved. As soon as Leclerc took over the Flying Dutchman, he and his crew started to attack other ships all over the Atlantic. No ship was safe when the Flying Dutchman was near. As soon as Leclerc and his crew saw the sails of another ship, they chased it. They used the Flying Dutchman's powerful cannons to stop the ship. Then Leclerc and his pirates captured the ship and took its valuable cargo. Then Leclerc sold the captured cargo for gold and silver. The treasure on the Flying Dutchman grew and grew. Soon Leclerc was the richest pirate in the world, and the Flying Dutchman was the most feared ship on the seas. Then one day, according to the legend, Leclerc decided to sail the Flying Dutchman to the waters near India. "There is even greater treasure there," he said to his crew. "The ships in the Indian Ocean won't know that the Flying Dutchman is now a pirate ship. We'll surprise them and take their cargo for our own." So Leclerc and his pirates headed to the southern tip of Africa. His plan was to go around the Cape of Good Hope and sail into the Indian Ocean. But as soon as the Flying Dutchman entered the waters of the Cape, a terrible storm started. The ship was tossed around by giant waves. The pirate crew was scared. They begged Leclerc to turn back. "Please, Captain," they cried, "don't make us go any further. Turn the ship around." Leclerc was too proud and too greedy to turn back. He only cared about the great treasure he could capture in the Indian Ocean. "Sail through the storm," he ordered. The Flying Dutchman sank in the stormy waters. On the Windcatcher, old Sam finished telling his story. Now, 200 years later, the Flying Dutchman's ghost sails the seas to warn other ships about dangers ahead. Terrible things happen to any ship that sees her and does not turn back. As the ghost ship sailed in front of the Windcatcher crew turned to their captain. "We have to turn around," they begged. As soon as the sailors spoke, terrible wind began to howl and giant waves began to hit the Windcatcher. A storm was coming their way, a storm that could sink the great clipper ship. The captain looked at his frightened crew. He thought of old Sam's story. Then he thought about the passengers he was taking to New York. "Turn the ship around," he cried. "We'll find a safe harbor and wait for the storm to end. The ghost ship is clearly a warning." The Windcatcher's crew turned away from the storm and headed to safety along the coast of Chile. And the ghost of the Flying Dutchman sailed off into the night, vanishing into the darkness. The end.